Cheryl, and thank you to everyone that's on the line. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today, as always. First thing I wanted to do was just tell you what we hope to accomplish today, and we would really like to just provide you with some useful tips that'll help you continue to gain maximize the value you gain from your Microsoft Dynamics GP solution. This session is similar to the sessions that many of you may have seen either through our conferences or through Microsoft events where we've had 50 tips in 50 minutes. However, I thought maybe we could slow it down a bit today and really focus on some nice tips, but maybe spend a little bit more time. So I actually have 22 tips to cover in 60 minutes, and truthfully we hope to get through those at a fairly good pace, but we want to make sure that you have questions, or if you have any comments, we certainly want to know about those. So I've broken down the agenda and these tips into really three categories. One is system setup and design. One is business functionality. So rather than saying these are general ledger, these are accounts payable, these are inventory, I really decided to just take a different approach and just put everything that is a functional tip, putting that under that category. And then lastly, business intelligence and reporting. And I really focused on some new tips that might be based on some things that are coming out, and also some old tips that are based upon just some of the fundamentals that we see on a day-to-day basis with our clients, and some common sense things that really can make a difference in regards to how you use the system. So I'm first going to start off with system setup and design, and our first tip is really one that I know that we've covered before, but I thought it was important to make sure that we went through this. Many of you have a number of changes in your staffing, or you have new people that come on board as you grow, and I just know that many over the years have really struggled in regards to just how do I set up John Doe to mimic the setup of Jane Smith, and this is really some nice functionality that will allow you to do that. So we have the ability to, in our user setup, to actually go in and copy home page and area page, but not only that, we have the ability to copy security access as well. So if you'll make notice here, we have some functionality here that talks about security access, and really and truly, over the years, this has been the hardest thing for people, and Microsoft has made significant progress in regards to GP and their security by setting up roles and tasks and making that more automatic. But there's still a lot to consider, and a lot of times we end up customizing those roles and tasks to fit our individual users. But also, wouldn't it be nice if we could very easily set up the home page, the area pages being once you've clicked on sales, the screen that you see there, etc., and making sure that those are mimicked and make that automatic rather than trying to figure out what was set up in one and not the other. So part of this has been around since like 2010, and that's the security capabilities. But the home page and the area page copying just came with GP 2015. And by the way, we're going to try where it's appropriate to mention what version is required to get some of this functionality. So this copy home page and area page came with the first release of Dynamics GP 2015, which was released in December. The security setup has been there for a little bit longer than that. So keep that in mind as you set up new users or want to change someone's role to be more in alignment with someone else as people grow and evolve. Another system-based option that I wanted to talk about really revolves around your ability to set up a new company and being able to copy some of the basic settings from one company to another. So if any of you are using the Professional Service Tools library, and there's a large number of you on the call, so I'm sure that some of you are, this is a set of utilities that's free as part of Dynamics and the licensing that you have. And this tool actually has one function in particular that you can see here on the screen that's called Company Copy. As you look at that, you see that you have the ability to copy data, but also report options. So that can be very important because you've spent time and you've groomed your existing system to be what you need it to be. And especially if you're setting up a test environment or you're mimicking one environment for a company to another, this really makes it a lot easier. So also then you can select which modules you wish to copy from the source to the destination, and you can see there's a list of all the modules. So this allows you to very easily take data elements that you have in one company and move that over to another. So like I said, I think some of the most important things to take away from this, and one of the things that we think is very important, is to always have a test company, so that you either with new staff or with maybe taking advantage of new functionality you've gained through some of the new licensing, that you can test it out before you actually take it into production. And so this allows you to make that setup a lot easier. And you can, again, do it by module, which I think is very useful. All right. So the third option that I have here that I think can be a very important feature is Dynamics Web Client, the GP Web Client. So this has been available for some time and actually is still going through some growing and changing. So if any of you have had the opportunity to look at the most recent GP roadmaps, you'll know that Dynamics GP 2015 R2 was released here just recently, and sometime after the beginning of the year we'll see a release 3. At that point, we're going to, from a technology perspective, the web client will actually move from what's called Silverlight to HTML5, and for those of you that are technical, I'm sure you have a good grip on what that all means. And for others, it's really just making sure that the solution is taking advantage of the latest and best tools for surfacing GP as a web client. The reason that I think that this is a very important piece of functionality is it really can, from a maintenance perspective, it can eliminate your need for client installations. You can also do this via a remote desktop or Citrix server as well, but is just another option that people can actually get to Dynamics GP via a web browser. I gave an example here of the login window, and then you can see behind that the actual Dynamics GP window. And in general, the windows and the look and feel of Dynamics GP Web Client are identical to what you see in the traditional client. And just for any of you that may have customizations or ISV or third-party products, excuse me, most of the Dynamics GP ISVs or third-party application providers that have developed their products to melt into the Dynamics GP interface will run just fine in the web client as well as in the traditional client. And people can write additional customizations that way as well. Integrations work the same. So in many ways, it is going to be identical to what you're experiencing today. For those of you that may have some customization that was written using Visual Basic for applications or VBA, that application, those customizations will not work in that environment. We also know, for any of you that are using Macorma as a MIC or check printing solution, that that is still a struggle. So there are some limitations in regards to certain applications and certain customizations. But for the majority of our client base, the web client can serve as a nice alternative and allow people to have really nice access to Dynamics GP remotely. Okay. All right, so we've had several discussions about this, but I think one of the best tips that I can provide for any of you is how to make your system more productive for you. How can it build more controls into your solution for you? And with the release of Dynamics GP 2013, and that was actually release 2 of 2013, and with the release of 2015, there have been a number of additional workflow functionality tools that have been added. And so some of those existed in the past in what was called the Business Portal, if any of you have used that in the past. But the Business Portal was restrictive. It required that you were using SharePoint, and not everyone in our client base is using SharePoint. So it had certain burden that others didn't want to really participate with. What we think is really important now is that workflow functionality has now been built into the interface of Dynamics GP. And so to give you some example, the following workflows are available inside of Dynamics GP 2015. Actually, 2015, and some of them were actually available in 2013 release 2. So I'll try to give you, as we go through these, I'll try to give you some sense of if you're on 2013, which ones you have, if you're on 2015, which ones you have. So requisitions was one of the first ones to be released, and requisitions and purchase order approvals were both built into Dynamics GP 2013 release 2. So that's R2. The original GP 2013 release did not include workflow. Vendor approval, or vendor onboarding as many people call it, was actually added in GP 2015. And actually, with the release of GP 2015 R2, vendor invoice approval is available. So if any of you go through a manual or paper process to send out an invoice and get somebody's signature on it before you pay the bill and enter it into accounts payable and pay the bill, this is a good alternative. The other thing about the vendor invoice approval is that you can also attach or scan and attach the documents to the invoice that gets sent out for approval, so it allows the approver to still have a copy of the invoice but electronically approve. When they approve, it automatically will become a voucher in accounts payable. So keep that one in mind as one that I think is going to get some pretty universal acceptance and will probably find some popularity amongst you. Some of the more traditional ones that were in the Business Portal are the Payables batches, the Receivables batches, General Ledger batches. All three of those were in the release 2015. And so what that allows you to do is before a batch can be posted, send it through an approval process. The approval process can be very flexible and gives you some power to make sure that you have the controls in place so that you can be more proactive in your approach. You know, the payables side is a really good example of many places that you can go along the way to put controls in. So, you know, you could say that the most proactive approach is by using requisitions. That way, before someone can even request a purchase order, they have to have been approved. Purchase order approval would be next most proactive, and that allows you to issue a PO, but before, or you can enter a PO, but before you can issue that PO to the vendor, you'll have to get approval on it. And then thirdly, vendor invoices is more after the fact. So we have purchased the goods, we've received the goods, and now we're getting an invoice. But before we pay that invoice, we need to make sure we have approval. So that's kind of the process that we go through. And then obviously with payables batches, it's more of I've entered a batch of invoices, I need approval before I can post that batch. Also with GP 2013 R2, we added project time and expense and timesheet functionality. So what this allows, for any of you that are using project accounting, this allows you to enter time. And that was actually in 2013 R2, and then expenses were added in GP 2015. So that allows us the flexibility of entering time and expenses and being able to allocate those to projects that we work on. Socius as a professional service firm uses project accounting, and we enter our time through project accounting and our expenses through project accounting. And one other tip you may want to consider for those of you using project accounting, we also have projects set up that are internal projects. So for things like training and internal meetings and team building and things like that, so we really get a true picture of all of the time that each of our individual employees spends. And for our consulting team, it allows us to really measure utilization fully. The last option is what's called HR self-service. And so there are a number of components in HR self-service, but the most important and most recently added tool is the ability to view and print your W-2 through Dynamics GP. Obviously, for the HR side, you have to be using HR, and for things like the W-2, you have to be using payroll as well. But the reason I mention that, and many of you may or may not know, is in the new Dynamics licensing that started with GP 2013, all of you own payroll and all of you own HR as part of your licensing. Now, that doesn't mean that you all have to rush out and drop ADP or Paychecks, but if you are looking for a solution, you do actually own those pieces of software. To further elaborate a little bit on the workflow, I just wanted to give you kind of an idea of what the screens look like. So you're actually defining here which modules and which processes you're actually going through, and you have the ability to set guidelines and rules for which these workflows work. So as an example, if I enter a requisition, I may have to send if I send a requisition and that requisition ends up being over a certain dollar amount, it may have to go to an extra level. If I issue a requisition and it's for IT equipment, not only does my manager need to approve it, but maybe also the director of IT needs to approve it. So you can build those kind of guidelines into this workflow. Also, as an approver and as a requester, there is email notification functionality so that the individuals who need to do the approval will know that, and there is even functionality for those not using GP to do the approval process directly through their email. So it really can be a great time saver. It eliminates the need for paper. It integrates directly so that I enter a requisition and it goes through it immediately turns into a PO, which then turns into an accounts payable invoice. And it really eliminates a lot of duplication and redundancy in entry. So I'm sure that some of our clients have already started down the path with this, but if you have interest in that, certainly let us know and we'll be glad to help. Anyway, I've spent a lot of time on workflow, but I wanted to make sure that we emphasize it because it is really, really important. And almost any organization, no matter what shape or size, has some area where this could come in handy. Okay, so now we're going to move out of the system functionality and design, time-saving and efficiency-gaining solutions. Now we're going to go into business functionality. So this is where I was very generic, but this could be anywhere from project accounting to general ledger to accounts payable and anywhere in between. So this one, many of you may already be aware of, but we do have a significant number of clients that actually will create journal entries in Excel, and then they'll either key them into general ledger or they will integrate them using an integration tool. And with GP 2013 R2, Microsoft added the functionality of actually just being able to do a copy and paste. So on the left-hand side of the graphic over here, you can see what a spreadsheet would look like, and then with a simple Control-C in Excel and clicking on the paste button in the general ledger journal entry window, I now have replicated that entry directly into the general ledger, thus saving time and effort. So anyway, the idea is that this copy functionality is going to save us a significant amount of time. Okay, and And disregard the second bullet point as it doesn't apply. I think I forgot to move that bullet point to the appropriate screen. So this does not apply to any modules other than General Ledger at this point, and that's important to know. If you are interested in other tools that allow you to do copy paste, there are some ISV solutions that are out there that would allow you to copy and paste things like payables invoices and other types of transactions. Okay. So a lot of these tips and tricks are things that I've been asked of recent, and so the next tip that I wanted to bring to the table, and many, if not most of you own this module as part of your licensing, like we've talked about, is the use of the module Analytical Accounting. We all try to make sure that we're smart about managing our chart of accounts and make it lean, but make sure that we are able to get the financial reporting that we feel is important. And so Analytical Accounting is really a tool that is meant to handle some of this. So as an example, Analytical Accounting allows you to create what's called a dimension, a transaction dimension. This dimension can be set up once. It can be attached to your chart of accounts, but not in your chart of accounts. So perfect examples of how this is used are projects or grants or programs. Some people use it to track expenses against customers. We have a client that works with, they're affiliated with a number of doctors, and they want to make sure as they incur expenses that they're able to assign these costs to those doctors, and without building all those variables into their chart. The advantage it brings is you don't have to have an extra segment that is allocated to that, and that's especially important if you have, say you have 100 or 500 projects or doctors or things like that that you want to track. It doesn't balloon your chart of accounts out of control, but it still allows you to report on the elements of your business that you need to. So what you can see here is I actually have an analytical accounting. I start in payables entry. I go to the distribution window, and then I can assign my proper dimensions to this individual GL distribution. I can then integrate these dimensions into Management Reporter. So for those of you that use reporting trees, the dimension can become a segment from your chart that allows you to print reports. You could print a P&L or an expense report or whatever is appropriate for any of those elements that you want to print on. So if it's a project, if it's a grant, we have a number of clients that actually track grants. They're not-for-profits and they're allocated grants, and they want to track their spending against that grant. And this is a great opportunity for them to do that. The other thing is that reporting is available through Excel pivot tables, and there also are reports in Smart List that you can use. So Analytical Accounting really allows you to take this type of reporting to the next level. I wouldn't recommend that you use Analytical Accounting for cost centers or departments or structural pieces of your business, but those other elements that are important for you to know but don't necessarily make up how you divide your business, it makes a lot of sense. All right, so I've done a lot of reading and been asked a lot of things about what's important or what are common questions that people ask and how do we address them. And one of the biggest things that people get asked is, I want to be able to reconcile my subledgers to my general ledger. And so oftentimes that means the payables module, the receivables module, but also inventory and bank reconciliation. And so Dynamics GP over the since I think, gosh, it may have been 2010 or before, has had this tool called Reconcile to GL, and it's been available for payables and receivables. In 2013, it was added to the bank rec and inventory modules as well. And so what it allows you to do is actually run a reconciliation process. It'll output to a spreadsheet, and you'll be able to compare the payables transactions and match them up against the GL transactions. So you define the date range, you define the account that makes up that particular module group, and it will automatically then provide you with a report that will show you where there may be differences. This is one way for people to really kind of dig in and find out where transactionally did we make a mistake. While we're on this topic, one of the things that people make a mistake of doing is they use the bank rec module as an example, but they'll enter journal entries in the general ledger to cash. And the bank rec module will actually send information to the general ledger, but the general ledger does not send information back to the bank rec module. The same is true with payables, the same is true with receivables. And so it's important that the subledger gets set up and the transactions flow through the subledger into the general ledger to make sure that you are going to reconcile properly. In the general ledger, there is a switch setting that I didn't put in this slide deck, but it can limit your ability to actually enter journal entries to account, and you can control that in situations like your bank accounts, payables, receivables, inventory, fixed assets. That can be a real important piece of making sure that you stay in line. All right. I'm going to continue my discussion of reconciling, though. And some of this may be common sense for many of you as you're already using some of these tools, but there are a number of reports that are available inside of GP that are designed to reconcile your subledgers to the general ledger. The newest one that just came out with the release of GP 2015 R2 is a historical but not received invoice report. This is a SQL Server reporting services report, and here's an example of it right here. And this is really important because it really plays into those of you who use the purchase order module. If you use the purchase order module, you'll know that when I issue a PO and I receive the goods but have not been invoiced, Dynamics GP creates an accrued payable transaction that gets reversed out at the point that you actually get the invoice. And so this report will allow you to actually reconcile the accrued account that sits on your balance sheet, and it certainly helps in regards to reconciling your payables as well. Now, for years there have been two historical age trial balance reports, one for payables and one for receivables. These reports actually provide you with the ability to print an aging as of a date, a GL date, and that way you should be able to reconcile the balance that you have in payables or receivables versus the balance that you have on your agings. And so that's a point-in-time type of report. With a release, I think it was in 2013, there was the release of a fixed asset to general ledger reconciliation report, and that report is, and that was a very welcome report, as a matter of fact, to allow you to do the very same thing for your fixed assets. So that way I can print a point-in-time report to reconcile my fixed asset balance in my subledger to the general ledger. And then over the years, inventory has been somewhat of a challenge, and that can be attributed to the valuation method you've chosen. I know that some people have had some struggles if they're on a average costing method. So at first there was a historical stock status report, but that was not all inclusive. And then probably in 2010 timeframe, they released a historical inventory trial balance. And so that's a report that you may want to take a look at if you're struggling with reconciling your inventory back to your general ledger. And we've seen situations where people have had significant chasms between those balances, and so that report actually allows you to look at transactions and make sure that everything checks and balances. So anyway, I think that reconciliation is something that you can really get your arms around if you know that these reports and these functions exist within Dynamics GP. So certainly, if you have questions on exactly how to get to them, etc., or what version they're available in, certainly don't hesitate to let us know. Okay. So the next, I would say, underutilized but very effective module that you probably all own, and that's part of my message, is take advantage of what you own, is the Revenue and Expense Deferrals module. And as the name would say, it automates revenue and expense deferrals. And it works with a variety of the modules that you already use, like General Ledger, Receivables Management, Payables Management, Sales Order Processing, Invoicing, and Purchase Order. The general concept is that, and we've seen it used in a number of ways, if you are billing, say for instance you're billing service contracts to your customers using sales order processing, and it may be an annual contract, and you want to recognize your revenue equally across the year. You bill them once, and this tool will allow you to spread the revenue and it'll defer, and then based on the frequency that you give it, it will then do an entry for you that will reverse the deferral as appropriate based on the calendar that you define. So there's different spread methods. You can be equal per period, it can be based on the number of days, and then you can define the number of periods. So if it's a 2-year service contract, then it could be 24 months, and if it's $2,400, it can then do a deferral reversal once a month for 24 months. And so it's a big time saver, because a lot of times people end up setting up manual recurring journal entries in their general ledger and have to post those every month. So this is more of an automated fashion for which you can address that. Also, we've worked with a client that had 50 stores. I don't remember the exact number, but say they had 50 stores, and each store had a copier. They had contracted all of these, the maintenance on all these contracts to one organization, and basically what they could do is then they could defer the expense over the life of the contract. And so that's another example of where this can come in really handy. So if this sounds like something that you want to know more about, certainly don't hesitate to let us know that, and we can jump in and give you some assistance. All right. Many of you probably are already aware that Dynamics GP has an e-banking suite. I'm really just going to mention in detail one of them today, but that e-banking suite includes what's called the Electronic Bank Reconcile module. This module is meant to allow you to receive a feed from the bank on some frequency, it could be daily, of all your cleared transactions. And it's really a very simple module to set up. You define the banking accounts. You work with your bank to determine the required format of the file that you need. And in a few screens and a little bit of coordination with your bank, you're able to integrate cleared transactions. And for any of your organizations that write hundreds, if not thousands of checks on a monthly basis, you know how painful it can be to go in and click off the checks that have cleared. This is a big time saver and allows your team to be more productive and focus more on productive things such as analyzing data or getting other projects done rather than spending time reconciling the bank account. So it does integrate with the bank file and clears those transactions right away. Just to give you some sense, the other e-banking modules that are available are the EFT for Payables module, which allows you to pay your vendors electronically. In the United States, that's starting to catch on. Elsewhere, like in Europe, it's almost that's the way they all do it. But it can be a real time saver in regards to paying your vendors. And we also have a module called EFT for receivables, which allows us to reach out and pull funds from our customers' accounts on a frequency that we define, so that we can make sure that we get paid for those open receivables as well. And then lastly, we have a positive pay. We call it Safe Pay, but it's a positive pay solution that allows you to, every time you run a check run, it actually sends a file to the bank to make sure that when those payments come back to the bank to clear, if they're not in the file, they don't clear, and you'll get a notification from the bank to allow you to investigate the issues that occur in that regard. So it really is fraud protection at its best. All right, so we'll continue moving on here. Our next option and tip that I wanted to make sure you know about, none of you have yet, but it's brand new, but it is a real time saver. Over the years, we've had so many people asking for the ability to be able to look and see all the transactions that are related to an invoice, or all the transactions that are related to a purchase order. And so now we have a purchasing all-in-one view that's available in Dynamics GP, and it's in release 2015 R2. But as you look at the screen here on the right, you can see that you can link POs to product receipts, to invoice receipts, to payments to the vendor, and even returns if those happen with the vendor. So this actually is accessible from the vendor maintenance and many purchasing windows, navigation lists, and home page. And basically it really allows you to see all of the information that's related to those purchasing transactions. Now, my understanding is, you're thinking, well, that's nice on the purchasing side, and it is, and it certainly should save you time and effort. The word is in the next release, which should happen after the beginning of the year of 2016, we will see a mirror image of this as on the sales side. So you'll be able to tie sales orders to quotes to orders to invoices. I haven't heard specifically yet as to whether it will tie purchase orders into that view or not, because obviously you can tie those together. But as you can see, they're really focused on providing you with some insight so that you can do your job more effectively. All right. As we continue on, the next tool I wanted to talk to you about is the vendor modifier and combiner. And we get asked about this all the time. I have duplicate vendors in my vendor base, or I have multiple companies, and I want to, or we're going to create a new company, and we want to clean up our vendor base. And how do we do that? And so what the vendor modifier and combiner does is, first of all, it was part of the professional service tools library. It is now a utility in the Payables module. It allows you to modify a vendor number, and you can't do that once you've saved a vendor with their assigned vendor number. This will actually allow you. This will allow you to go in and change the modifier. Will allow you to change the vendor number, and it will then go in and change all the historical records for that vendor so that they correspond, so that you can still drill down, you can see all of the activity for that vendor, but it would now be under the new scheme. So a lot of reasons that people would use this is that they would maybe not be satisfied with the inconsistency or the method for which they numbered their vendors in the past, and would like to clean that up so that they are consistent. So maybe they were using a numeric system and now they'd like to put in an alphanumeric system so that they can use the vendor number for reporting and those types of things. So in this screen, basically, you have two columns. You have the source vendor and the destination vendor. So when you're modifying, you're basically saying, here's the old number, here's a new one. Well, you may have decided that, hey, I'm going to do 500 of these vendor realignments. Excuse me. And in that case, you can actually import a spreadsheet where column 1 is old, column 2 is new, and then all you have to do is process the window, just clicking the button up here in the corner, and it will then go in and do its job. Now, this is just one of the tools that are available. You have the same thing for customers, you have the same thing for inventory items, and you have the same thing for general ledger accounts. And so just be aware. Our most common citing of this is the vendor, just because there's so many duplications. So ultimately, this is included in your licensing. All of you have access to this. Okay. So we talked about workflow earlier, but I wanted to just emphasize again the payables transaction approval workflow. This actually is allowing you to receive an invoice, and hopefully you can see this in this window. Your payables window will change. It will include a submit button, so that you enter the invoice, you submit it for approval. Once it comes back from approval, then it will be you can then post it and then pay it. But it's kind of like many of you may have gone through the process of I get an invoice in the mail, I put a stamp on it, I send it out to John Doe manager because he's the one responsible for it. He signs off on it, it comes back, we enter it in the payables, and we then post it and pay it. So this automates all of that process, and you have controls over that. And it also works for invoices, charges, credit memos, and returns. So any of those payables type transactions. And it really allows you to provide spending controls by requiring validation, but a more controlled validation because it doesn't include paper, and it's more automated. Now, just to remind you, this functionality is available in GP 2015 R2. It was not available until then. But my tip for you is if when you upgrade, really give some thought as to whether this makes sense for your organization. All right, we'll continue to move along. I'm going to switch gears from the payables and procurement side, and I'm going to talk a little bit about HR and payroll. So I know this is a smaller subset of our clients, but as many of you have probably heard the term Affordable Care Act, this Dynamics GP has compliance with the Affordable Care Act. So what that requires is if you're using payroll that you and maybe not HR, there is some there's some functionality in HR that needs to be added to this so that you're collecting the information that you need appropriately. And it really applies to any business with 50 or more full-time equivalent employees, and you have to provide, and for those companies, they have to provide health care for those full-time employees. This functionality, the ACA compliance, leverages GP payroll but HR, and it provides the mandated forms and reports that you need. So there's going to be two documents in particular, a 1094 and a 1095, that you're going to need to produce at the end of this year or in the beginning of 2016, and that will be something that you need to prepare for. We have some payroll and HR specialists here on our team, and I certainly want to make sure that you reach out to your account manager or to any of us here to get in touch with the right people to talk about this, because you should be preparing for this to be ready for the end of the year. If you're on an older version of Dynamics GP, such as 2010 or prior, the Affordable Care Act compliance is not inside of those modules. It's only 2013 and greater. And so, but there is still a hope. You can either upgrade, or there are third-party applications that are also available. So there is a product from a company called Green Shades. There is a company called SIPNEO, and another one called AIM Technologies. Those three companies have written applications that provide ACA compliance using Dynamics GP. So keep that in mind. SIPNEO is actually built into the interface of GP. Green Shades and AIM Technologies are actually portal solutions that just leverage the data that you have. And those tools are actually a little bit more proactive in regards to they're a more monitoring tool versus GP is really just collecting the data that you give it. All right. So I want to continue down the HR payroll way, and this is another thing.
Jeff, can I interrupt you for one question?
Yes.
I'm sorry, it was a couple slides ago. So the question is, where do we go to find the vendor modifier screen that you were showing on your screen?
It's, and I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's under purchasing, and it's under, I think it's under utilities. And you have to be on 2013 for it to be there. Otherwise, it's going to be under the professional service tools library that you may have to download.
Okay, that's it. We're ready to go on, Jeff.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So next thing we wanted to cover is the W-2, viewing the W-2. So with the release of GP 2015 R2, you now have the ability to empower your employees to actually print their own W-2s, or at least look at their own W-2s directly from Dynamics GP. Obviously, this means that you're using the payroll module, which I know is not our entire customer base, but we certainly want those who use those modules to know this. One other thing related to payroll is that there now is a new HR self-service time management app that's available also in GP 2015 R2, and this allows people to actually it allows them to submit vacation and sick time, and it actually will update payroll and HR based upon the types you have. One of the things I wanted you to know is all of these self-service apps are available to work on either something like a Surface, like I'm using, Windows 8, iOS, like an iPad device, or an Android tablet. And I do want to be clear on that. Some people would like to have that on their iPhone, and the app does not exist for the iPhone. It does exist for the iPad at this point. So I know there's a lot of Apple users out there. So just another tool that's been added to the HR suite for consumption. All right. So anyway, I covered a lot there, and I kind of went all over the place from general ledger tips to payables tips to workflow tips to HR tips and payroll tips. But I wanted to make sure that you had some, what seemed to be a lot of questions that we're getting now in regards to how can I use my system better. All right, so we're going to go into the final stretch here, and thanks for all sticking with me here. We're going to go and talk about business intelligence and reporting. So I've mentioned this a couple times, but I can't emphasize enough how important it is for individuals within your organization to have access to the key information, business data, no matter where they are. And so the Business Analyzer And this has been available for several years. It's just now it's cross-platform now, so it can work on iOS, Android, and Windows platform. This also is iPad, but not iPhone. But the idea here is that it allows you to surface reports that are created in SQL reporting services and also Management Reporter. So this is a dashboard type tool that can be mobile. It can actually also be available as a desktop application, or it can actually be, for those using Dynamics GP, can be available right on your desktop. And so it's very versatile. You can drill into a lot of this data so that you can get to the heart of, what makes up the 90-day bucket in receivables, etc. Those types of things. And this is all based on you being able to create reports. There are hundreds of already predefined reports, and I'm sure some of those would apply to you, but you can also have us, or you can create your own reports as well. Also, in regards to business intelligence, there are over 200 predefined reports available that are Excel. And this is an example of a dashboard, but these are refreshable, which means every time I launch Excel, these reports will be updated. You'll notice over here that we actually have a date option, and you can change the date, and it will dynamically change the numbers based upon the dates that you select. And it provides you with some key information, like your financial ratios, some key financial data like net income, your banking information. And by the way, this isn't a really good company to work for because they seem to be pretty low on cash. But the idea is that these are refreshable, they're available, and they're underutilized, and I think that's the reason I wanted to make sure people knew they existed here. I also wanted to talk about SQL reporting services. Again, there are over 250 reports here, and my main message here is I bet most of you have, if you work in accounting, have had a discussion with an auditor saying, can you give me your aging report in Excel? And you're like, how am I going to get my aging report in Excel? That's not easy, and it's not easy in GP. And so I just want you to take note that there is flexibility in SSRS reports, that you can actually save a report, and I didn't show it here, but if you drop down this little caret right here, one of your save options is to Excel. And so it really does allow you to have the flexibility of taking data of common reports that you get a lot of requests for and dropping them right into Excel, as well as these reports are available either through GP or via a web browser. So a lot of times these reports can be very useful because you don't have to be a GP user, and you can just simply go to a web browser to pull them out. Another module that has been around forever that is really rarely used but is built in is a module called Cash Flow Calendar. And so what this does is it allows you, it interfaces with payables, purchase order, receivables, and sales order. And the idea is that you can set up your individual cash accounts, and you can tell it which modules you're going to interface with. So in sales, for instance, I might want to see all open and work receivables. I want to see all sales order processing documents, and I can even include quotes. And then I can forecast my cash based upon either the due dates on the transactions, or I can do it based on average days for them to pay. On the purchasing side, we can do the same thing, open and work, and we also then can include purchase order documents. And then lastly, we have the ability to build in cash flow transactions. So if you know that you're going to receive an invoice for $50,000, but you haven't gotten it yet, you can enter a transaction that would be a cash flow transaction that will be a filler until that comes. Ultimately then, you can get a calendar form that will show you your cash balance based upon the bank account and what you're doing in bank rec. It will show you for each day either a blue number, which means it's an increase to the cash account, or a red number, which means it's a decrease. And then you have a window that's called a Cash Flow Explorer that will allow you to see what transactions make up those increases and decreases. So it is a really nice tool. It is mostly based upon what is in GP as a cash flow forecaster, but it does really leverage that data, your bank rec module, and a variety of the other modules to give you a good picture of where you should be cashed day by day. And it's totally underutilized, and I think it's something that it would be nice for people to know about. Another thing I wanted to talk about in regards to reporting is cross-reference reports. So inside of Dynamics GP, in the general ledger, there are reports that are called cross-reference reports. These cross-reference reports can be either a journal entry report, a source document report, or an audit trail code report. So as an example, I could actually pull a report that would show me all my general journal entries from the month of December. Or I can set up a report to show me all of my audit trail that is assigned to PMTRX, which might be payables transactions, for a particular time frame. And so from an auditing perspective, this is a nice way to be able to give an auditor some of the information they need. This leads to another discussion about the built-in audit trail codes inside of Dynamics GP. There are a variety, each module is assigned its own audit trail codes, but they don't necessarily lend themselves to being a part of a range. So if I wanted to see everything from payables, most of the audit trail codes in payables are PM something, but some of them aren't. Or receivables might be RM something, but some of them aren't. Some of them are SLS or some of them are APL, depending on what function I am. And so this allows you to rename, you could rename those and then get even more powerful reports in regards to your source documents or your audit trail codes. And you control all of that. All right, I'm almost done, and so be patient with me here. One of the last things I wanted to talk about was all of you on 2010, 2013, or 2015 have access to what's called navigation lists. And navigation lists are a nice way for you to be able to get to your data and act on that data. And this data can also link to the business analyzer. As you can see over here, we have graphics. In this example, I've pulled my customers. I have the ability to edit the columns. I can actually print an aging. I can mark this customer and just click aging, and it would print an aging for just those. I can have go-to functionality, so I can highlight a customer and it can bring up their aging, it can bring up their their customer card, it can do all of that. So these views are customizable. They give you a little bit of flexibility you don't have. You have the ability to select certain records, apply holds, print reports, etc. And so I think this is something that I think a lot of you can certainly take advantage of. And with that, I think I've gotten all of my 22 tips in an hour, and I'm going to let Cheryl finish up with some comments.
Great, sounds good. Thanks, Jeff. And we do have some questions coming in, so to remind everyone, you can either submit them through the question box or raise your hand and I can unmute your line for Jeff. Jeff, where do we find the cash flow forecast?
The cash flow forecast is actually under the financials, and I think it's under inquiry. And there are a couple different menu options there.
There's some questions here about the presentation being shared afterwards. We'll make sure to send out a link to the slide deck as well as a link to the recording so that you'll have access to share with your team after the presentation. And on this slide, we're showing there's a couple of upcoming events. Our next GP user webinar is going to be on July 16th over GP and Office 365. And we've started to market our Solution Spotlight Series events featuring BI, Cloud, and CRM. Those are about 2-hour events located in Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland. And they'll be in July, August, and September. So please share those with any technology, operations, sales and marketing, accounting and finance. We are offering 2 hours of CPE credit for each event attended. And they are free events. So here's another question, Jeff.
Okay.
Where do we go to find the vendor modification screen?
And I don't have my window up in front of me, but I believe it's under purchasing. Well, first of all, you have to be on GP 2013 for it to be on your menu. If not, the professional service tools library has to be installed, so it might not be there. So, but I think it's under utilities and under purchasing. And if it's not there, send me an email and I will double check that and make sure. I just don't have my GP active right now. It's a free download, and we can certainly make sure it gets installed for you if it's not there yet.
Jeff, if you want to flip to the next slide, this is Jeff's contact information if you want to reach out to him directly. Looks like that's all the questions we have in the box for now. So we're going to say thank you for everyone for attending, and we'll stay on the line for a couple more minutes here in case anybody thinks of any more questions for us. We do have a hand raised here, Jeff. I'm going to unmute Brenda's line so she can ask you a question.
Where can we find the information and in what version for the deferrals for revenue and expenses?
The revenue and expense deferrals have been available for some time. So if you're on...
We're on 2013 R2.
You should have it, yes.
Where can I find that?
I'll tell you what. Let me do something real quick. I'm going to take the slide deck down if that's okay with you, Cheryl.
Yeah, of course.